Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency. The final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome back into our latest edition of the 2024 Team Autopsy Report. We're heading down to beautiful Lynchburg, Virginia, right off of I-81 there. And this is a team that I have a lot of questions about where this program is, where it should be, and how do they need to get back to that point. Let's start right there with the head coach, Brent Pry. Completed his third year there as the head coach of the Hokies with an overall record of 16-21. Yes, 2 bowl appearances, but you're talking about a program that has failed to win 8 games under his leadership. And with the amount of talent there in both that part of Virginia, and then when you head over to the Tidewater area where you've seen guys like Michael Vick, Ronald Curry, and so many other great athletes come out of that area, as well as dipping into Eastern Tennessee. This is a program that should be competing for the ACC title and not just competing to make a bowl game. So I think that this is a big year in 2025 for head coach Brent Pry. If he can't get the Hokies to be a little bit more competitive as far as winning an ACC championship, maybe time to make a change there at the head coaching position. Let's start with the betting window. Back in June, the season win total for the Hokies was 8.5. This team fell well short of that, winning only 6 regular season games. when we look at our composite win total, 3 statistical categories make up that total. We actually had them a little bit below that at 8 wins, still 2 games off of that mark. So did not get you to the betting window if you took the over, whether it was our in-season win total or more importantly, the line that our friends at the Desert set. So this is why I say this is a very important year for Brent Pry to get the Hokies at least close to the ACC title game. Now, let's talk about the strength of record and strength of schedule. Your strength of record, basically, you only can control who you play in the non-conference, as your conference schedule is pretty much set out for you. So it's really, truly a random luck of the draw as far as who do you get and who do you avoid that will kind of boost or weaken that number. So it's really important for these teams to kind of start beefing up that strength of schedule if you're playing in a conference like the ACC. Now, the strength of schedule for Virginia Tech was 0.542. That was the 17th strongest strength of schedule out of 134 teams that played Division I football last year. So they had a very challenging schedule. Now, when we look at their strength of record, now this you can't control. Basically, it's how do your opponents perform throughout the season and what is their final win total. When you look at Virginia Tech, 0.597, that was the 26th best strength of record out of 134 teams. So their opponents were winning a lot of games last year. And why do I bring that up? It's because with the added layers of the college football playoffs, you're going to need both a good strength of schedule and a good strength of record if you're talking about one of these teams that are looking to make an at-large berth into the college football playoffs. We know that the conference champions are going to get in, but if you're talking about a team that's going to be around that 9, but on most years, if not all years, to that 10-win plateau, what's really going to separate you is that strength of schedule and strength of record. That's why we kind of built both of those components into our Crunch Time Sports Advantage Playoff Committee rankings that we release pretty much after week 7. So let's take a look at that schedule. And if you're joining us on YouTube or watching this on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, want to say thank you. If you're listening along on the podcast, don't worry, I got you covered here. I'm going to go through these data points for you. So let's take a look at the win-loss records for Virginia Tech's opponents and see if that 26th strength of record ranking kind of makes sense to you. So they opened the season with Vanderbilt. Vandy went 6-6 last year and pulled off some significant upsets last year. So that was a lot better than going into the season what was forecast. Marshall went 9-3. Old Dominion went 5-7. Rutgers went 7-5. The Canes went 10-2. Stanford 9-3. That's a conference game. Boston College 7-5. Georgia Tech 7-5. Syracuse, Clemson, and Duke all 9-3, and then ending the season with the whole in-state rival Virginia, who fell a little bit short, going 5-7. Now, how good were the defenses that this Virginia Tech team in 2024 played against? We use that baseline of 68 because 68 is the number of Power 4 teams when you look at the 4 major conferences and Notre Dame. So we use that as a baseline. How many of Virginia Tech's opposing defenses were inside of that top 68? Vanderbilt, 32nd best defense for us in college football last year. Quite an impressive job there. We'll talk a little bit more about them here in about another week or so when we get to the Southeastern Conference. Rutgers was 64th. Miami, 47th best defense last year. Boston College, 55th. Georgia Tech, the 15th best defense for us in college football last year. Syracuse barely makes the cut at 67. Syracuse 67, Clemson 35th, Duke 45th, and Virginia 65th. So 9 of their opponents were inside of that top 68, did not really face a team outside of the top 100, and even their 3 worst teams, the lowest rank was still Stanford, and they were 90th. So didn't face a team outside of the top 100 as far as a defense goes. And looking at it, 1 opponent inside of the top 25. When you average out their opponent defensive power rankings, looking at about a 56 power ranking, that's a team that probably, just from purely the defensive side of the ball, probably about a 7-5 team, maybe even stretching closer to that 8-4. So week in and week out, from opening weekend until the final weekend of the college football season, this team faced a really competent defense week in and week out. Now, let's get you over to the NCAA averages for some of these key categories. Then we'll give you what the team data points were, and then we're going to give you our adjusted numbers for those categories. So average team last year scored about 28 points per game last year. Virginia Tech was at 29.7. We actually, when we adjust for opponent, a tick better at 30.3. So decent job from the offense there as far as putting points on the board. As far as the passing game, average team last year about 227 yards per game passing. Virginia Tech only 193 yards per game. And when we adjust that for opponent, actually goes down by almost 12 more yards per game, 181 yards per game passing. When we look at the rushing totals, NCAA average last year about 160 yards per team last year. When we look at Virginia Tech, 187 yards per game, but when we adjust that for opponent, actually goes up to 206. So almost a 19 yard per game improvement based on the quality of opponents there. And then total offense, 387 yards per game in total offense. Virginia Tech was at 380 yards per game. When we adjust for opponents, they're basically right there on the average at 387. So this team was about a 6-6 team when you look at where they ranked as far as those key categories. Let's take it a little bit deeper here. Now, on the season, teams in Division I averaged a score about 40% of their drives, touchdown or field goal. For Virginia Tech, 44.5, so solid job there. Now, drives ending with a touchdown. You want to know the difference between winning games and losing games? It's scoring touchdowns and not kicking field goals. Last year, the average was about 29%. Virginia Tech was at 32.6. Again, a little bit better than the NCAA average. And then when we look at third down conversions, average team converted about 39% last year. Virginia Tech slightly below that, just 1 percentage point, 38.1%. This team did not do a great job of protecting the quarterback. And you see this with a lot of running quarterbacks. They will occasionally run themselves into about 5 or 6 sacks on the season. So the fact that they had a higher sack total, you'll see that quite a bit with a team with a running quarterback. And Kyron Drones last year absolutely ran himself into a couple of sacks. Got a chance to watch this team both live and on television. Definitely saw that. So he's got to get better at that. You got to sometimes throw the ball away, live to fight another down. Now, the team did a solid job of taking care of the ball, 16 turnovers during the season. Now, let's go one step further. Our 3 E's. How effective, explosive, and efficient was your team's offense last year? And for the Hokies, 61st in effective offense last year, 45th in explosive plays, 50th in efficiency. The 2024 Virginia Tech Hokies ended the regular season as our 53rd rated offense last year. And I mentioned Calvin Jones, and usually I say these for the end of the podcast, but I'm going to go ahead and get to his numbers now. And just looking at his passing numbers, because he was much more dynamic as a runner than a passer. Appeared in 9 games last year, completed less than 61%, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns, 6 INTs. Got to be much more efficient there as a passer, because when we look at his rushing numbers in those 9 games, 98 rushing attempts. So he was averaging about 10 rushing attempts per game last year, 336 yards, 3.5 yards per rushing attempt, 6 touchdowns. Now, Tuden, the running back who really led this offense last year, he's off to the NFL, and he takes with him almost 1,200 yards rushing, 15 rushing touchdowns, 6.3 yards per carry. This team was hitting home runs because that young man with that kind of track background was getting into the secondary and getting there with explosive plays. Now, let's flip it over to the defense. And again, you'll see the graphic if you're watching this. I'll run through it really quickly. What kind of quality offenses did Virginia Tech defense go up against last year? Once again, using that baseline of 68, Vanderbilt was the 51st rated offense for us last year. Marshall, final team to make the cut at 68. Old Dominion was 64th. Rutgers was 46th. The Hurricanes was the number 1 scoring offense for us last year. You look at Boston College was 54th. Georgia Tech was 61st. Syracuse was the 20th best offense last year. Clemson, 13th. And then Duke was 59th. So 10 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. And again, no team outside of the top 90 in their other 2 games. So when you look at it, the worst offense they faced last year from a power ranking standpoint was Virginia, and they were 87. Now you're talking about an average ranking of about 51. This would have been an offense on a team that was absolutely at least 8-4 last year. And I'll go back to something I touched on at the beginning of the pod. Remember I said that this team missed their projected win total by 2 games. I'm going to give you the exactly 2 games where our formula said that they should have won, but absolutely lost. And we're going to go back to the middle of the season when we look at that game against Rutgers, losing that game 26-23. And then finally, if you look at the game against Duke, losing that game 28-31. If they win those 2 ball games, this team is looking at a 8-4 regular season, and that would absolutely have made a big difference in how this coach and this team is looked at in 2024. Now, let's talk about the defense. Just going to go through their accounting stats and then what we adjusted for on the defensive side of the ball. This team gave up 22.8 points per game last year. When we adjust for opponent, actually improves by 4 points down to 18.8. When we look at their passing yards per game allowed, 214.3. When we adjust for opponent, almost a 32-yard improvement down to 182.8. Now, the rushing numbers, still solid. Gave up 145.4 yards per game on the ground. When we adjust for opponent, goes up to 155.9. So not a big swing there. And as far as total offense allowed per game, 300 and let's round it to 60 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, that's actually down to 339 yards per game. So almost a 20-yard per game improvement when we adjust for opponents. So defense, a little, I would say, much better than what we saw from the Hokies offense. We'll dive a little bit deeper into those numbers here right now. As far as drives ending with a score, touchdown or field goal, 26%, well below the NCAA average of 40%. As far as their opponents putting touchdowns on the board. Only 18.3% of their opponent's drives ended with a touchdown. Again, almost a 10 percentage point improvement over the average team last year. This team did a really good job of getting off the field on third downs. 35.1% conversion rate by their opponents. When we look at that, 4 percentage points better than the NCAA average. This team did a fantastic job of getting after the quarterback. 36 sacks in the regular season. About 13 more than what the average team would have gotten last year. This team also did a great job of fourth down stops. Their opponents, 9 for 22, 41% conversion rate, 12 percentage points better than the average team in college football last year, and forcing 23 turnovers. Absolutely phenomenal job there. When I look at their 3 E's on defense, this team was pretty good in a lot of these categories. The 21st rated effective defense last year, 51st in explosive plays. You want to see that come down a little bit to marry up with the rest of their 3 E numbers. And finally, efficiency, 19th. When we look at the 2025 rankings, Virginia Tech's defense was the 28th best defense in college football last year. Something to keep in mind when we go into 2024. So if I had to bullet point their offense and defense with just a one bullet point here, the offense, ground game strength, passing struggle, absolutely. And then as far as the defense, strong against the pass, but did struggle in some key situations during the season last year. Now let's talk about coaching and situational play. And we'll start right here with the special teams first. 15 of 18 conversion rate on field goals, 83%. That's phenomenal. Made all the extra points. Averaged about 4.5 punts per game for 43.8 yards per punt. That was 37th as far as average per punt ranking. +7 in the turnover differential. You absolutely love that. That was in the top 30. Penalties, 5.9 penalties per game. That's right on the average. Same with their penalty yards as far as 50 penalty yards per game last year. Now, here's the disappointing thing about Coach Pry last year. 0 for 5 in one-score games last year. Like I said, if you just win 2 of those 5 games, you're now sitting with a better record, and you got people there in Blacksburg, Virginia, absolutely excited about this team going into 2025. Against quality opponents, 1 for 4. Once again, if you just get 1 or 2 more of those wins, you're cooking with some hot grease now. Now, Coach Pry, one of the more conservative coaches, let me change that. One of the least aggressive head coaches going for it on 4th down. Ranked 111th out of 144 qualifying coaches last year in Division I football. Converted 8 out of 19 attempts on 4th down. So when you're not doing a great job on the conversion rate, you should not be aggressive going for it on 4th down. And as I look at the clock, we got about 6 minutes left. So let's get to the splits here as far as how this offense looked in their wins versus their losses. 6 wins, 6 losses. There shouldn't be a huge gap in those data points, but let's take a look. In those 6 wins, averaging 33.2 points per game, only 22 passing attempts per game when they won, 177 yards per game, 8 yards per pass attempt, 12 yards per completion. The strength of this team was their ground game, led by that strong offensive line. 42 rushing attempts per game for 217 yards rushing, 5.2 yards per rushing attempt. This team averaged about 64 offensive plays per game, 6.1 yards per play. Run pass ratio, running 65%, 35% pass. Team only committed 4 turnovers in those 6 wins. Now, in the losses, 26 points per game, but the passing attempts go up. 31 passing attempts. Passing yardage did not carry along with that. Only 209 yards passing. 6.7 yards per attempt, 12.3 yards per completion. The rushing attempts go down just slightly, 35 rushing attempts per game, only 157 yards per game rushing, 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. So not a huge drop off, about 67 plays per game. Run pass ratio, a little bit more closer to 50-50 there. 53% run, 47% pass. Did commit 12 turnovers in those 6 losses. So when this team took care of the ball and ran the ball, they were winning much more than they were losing. Now let's take a look at the defensive splits. In those 6 wins, this defense was giving up less than 14 points per game, 13.7. Their opponents were throwing up for about 158 yards per game on 31 attempts, 5.1 yards per pass attempt. That is elite defense there. 10.5 yards per completion. Their opponents were averaging about 148 yards per game rushing, 4 yards per rushing attempt on 30, let's call it 37 rushing attempts per game by their opponents. Did a great job on third down conversion there, only 32% conversion rate by their opponents when they forced 12 turnovers. In their 6 losses, their opponents were absolutely finding big chunk plays through the air. Folks, 271 yards per game passing on the same amount of passing plays per game, 8.8 yards per passing attempt. But here's the biggest problem, almost 15 yards per pass completion. The rushing attempts for their opponents only go up about 2 rushing attempts per game. The rushing yardage stays about the same. But here's where this team really struggled, giving up almost 47% conversion rate on third downs, 60% on fourth downs, still forced 11 turnovers. So their opponents were going for it less, but converting more often on fourth downs in those losses. So let's go ahead and get to the final grade here. The Virginia Tech Hokies will get a final grade of a C+. Why? When we look at it, this team struggled in 1-score games, very inconsistent offense, and pass defense absolutely was assist in those losses. The final verdict, Virginia Tech was a middle-tier team that underperformed due to late game collapses and very questionable coaching decisions in key opportunities. They left opportunities on the table and will need to adjust their offensive strategy going forward. Let's talk about the keys for this team in 2025. I got 3 of them, and they're all right on point for me when I look at it. The first key is this team absolutely has to get offensive balance and consistency from the quarterback here. Kyron Downs will be the linchpin to this team either succeeding or not. You don't want to put all of that pressure on him, but that is a part of the position, playing quarterback in big-time college football. The second, there are going to be times where you need to be a little bit more aggressive going forward on fourth downs. You got to find a way to continue to put up 7 and not just sometimes settle for the field goal. It's all going to be situational driven, but got to look at that, Coach Brent Pry. And then finally, must improve the late game executions. I talked about it, 0-5 in one-score games. That comes down to coaching, and you have to be better decision-making in those high-pressure situations. If the Virginia Tech Hokies can focus on those three areas, the Hokies can take a step forward and absolutely find themselves back in a bowl game in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.